Final Space is the type of show that can seem really stupid up front, but has real heart and emotion if you're willing to watch through the surface levels. That's not to say the surface levels are bad, but a lot of people really hate Gary and cite him as the reason why they couldn't get into the show. I for one have dealt quite a bit with people like Gary, so that was an easy hurdle for me to overcome. While Final Space does have some hiccups, this is also the first time that Olin Rogers, the show's creator, has spearheaded a production of this size. But even still, the storytelling, animation, and other various techniques used in the making of the show eventually become so natural and effective that it hurts me to hear people dismiss the show for such surface level reasons. So, I've decided to document every episode as a visual wiki in an attempt to help those people experience the show without having to deal with the Gary. That's what sane people do, right? One thing I particularly like about the first season, as opposed to the other two, is the use of their cold opens. Each cold open in the first season is like a breadcrumb that leads you to a satisfying tie-in during the last episode. Gary is drifting through space while leaking O2. Faced with death, Hugh, the AI in Gary's helmet, emotionally spews out predictions of his survival, which are obviously slim. Gary, trying to maintain his composure, undercuts the bleakness with what he must think are witty one-liners. After the opening song, we open on an empty ship. We're introduced to Gary, who gets a rude awakening from Hugh. I really like the use of wide shots in this sequence to emphasize Gary's loneliness. This works as a metaphor of how loneliness sometimes feels like a prison, but we'll get to that. As Gary gets ready, we're really shown just how alone he is. He's working alone, showering alone, eating alone, and then we're introduced to the Sames, a bunch of robots that don't really interact with Gary. He's even giving them names, so it's clear that he's become delusional. From experience, being alone makes you feel like there's nothing and no one to reach out to for help. It makes you do desperate things like hooking up with the fridge? Well, I went through a lot of pillows in high school, so I can't really judge. Gary tries to play with the robot. Hank. Gary tries to play cards with Hank, but Hank uses his flamethrower to burn the cards to a crisp. We then meet Kevin, who Gary does not vibe well with.
I hate Kevin! So painfully.
We learn that Gary is a prisoner, and has been for 5 years. Later on, Gary makes a vlog for Quinn, a sort of love letter which leads into a flashback. Gary's on the run from seemingly a heist of some kind. This never really comes up again, but it kind of paints Gary as some kind of lowlife. In later episodes, we'll learn that he was an orphan, but we'll get to that in a different video. He hides in a bar which ends up being a hub for the Infinity Guard, the military in this world, sees Quinn, and gets so thirsty that he does some horrid things to get a pilot uniform just to talk to her.
You're a good guy, Gary!
Gary tries his best to flirt with Quinn, but then war were declared. He's forced to pilot a ship under pressure, and ends up causing major destruction, which ends up getting him arrested. Throughout the series, they really want to hammer in the fact that he also destroyed a small Mexican family restaurant.
Just take out 92 Star Cruisers in a small, family-owned Mexican restaurant.
It's weird. This is where Gary meets Kevin, Gary's
deep space insanity avoidance companion.
Now, I find it interesting that he's just the biggest source of hate for Gary throughout the series. I want to say that this feels Hegelian in nature, but I'm not really smart enough to use those words. Not yet, at least. As Gary sends the message, Hughes tells him that there is a low probability that she'll even receive it. But Gary maintains his optimism, which at this point is starting to get a little annoying. Gary gets back to work and, while on break, meets Mooncake, which reminds him of a gift from his dad. Mooncake is also just so freaking adorable. They become quick friends and head back to the ship. We cut to the Lord Commander, who's about to torture someone, but in the process gets shamed for being small. Again, this show uses comedy to undercut the seriousness of what's actually going on. As Lord Commander continues the interrogation, Gary tries to hide Mooncake. These last two scenes really cement just how opposite Gary and Lord Commander are, signaling Gary as the good guy and Lord Commander as the villain. But I want to pose a question for y'all to think about over this series. Is Gary a good guy? Even before he was a prisoner, he was kind of like this manosphere alpha wannabe in the bar, and that led to the destruction of a small family-owned Mexican restaurant. That seems like something a shitty person would do, but I digress. The Galaxy One comes under attack. Gary, excited for visitors, quickly gets isolated as some bounty hunters break in. The Lord Commander's message plays ordering the Galaxy One to hand over E-35-1 as the sames are dispatched for battle. This battle is as well done as can be expected of a first episode. What I really like about it is how we see the sames have sentience to a point, with one of them screaming,
"This is what I was meant to do! I have never felt so alive!" Oh!
Hugh suggests they give up Mooncake, but Gary convinces him to protect and lightfold the ship. One of the hunters gets close, but runs away as the lightfold starts to happen, causing distress for the others. The animation they use for the lightfold sequence is so beautiful, it's just very mesmerizing, until they realize they land in a path of asteroids. This leads to a sequence where Gary has to get his helmet under pressure, which of course he does just in the nick of time. Hugh finds a distressed Gary one last-ditch effort to try and save him, but it won't work with Mooncake. Which, I mean, Mooncake can obviously fly, so this drama seems very contrived. Also, the layout of everything doesn't really match up with the visuals, so Gary tries with Mooncake anyway, but fails. As he passes out, Mooncake saves the day in a sequence that still sends chills up my spine. It's the piano. Gary wakes up after being dead for a few minutes, and after celebrating for a bit, he learns that there is still a hunter on board. Gary confronts Avocado with such confidence even without knowing he's backed up by the sames.
Oh, good lord!
As they all play cards, Avocado gives a bunch of exposition on exactly what Mooncake is.
That is a planet killer.
Gary ignores this and declares friendship with Mooncake. Hugh ends up rewarding Gary with a cookie, but withdraws it when Gary gets cocky. However, Gary braves through the pain and reaches for a cookie while saying,
"The penitent man shall pass."
which is a song by John Williams and Indiana Jones, which itself is a reference to the Bible. Weird how that happens. Anyway, Gary gets so excited about getting a cookie that he makes a blog about it to Quinn. However, Kevin steals the cookie. Also, that night, Kevin tries to prank a sleeping Gary, but is thwarted by Mooncake. The episode ends on Lord Commander being vaguely ominous. Wow, I really need to work on tightening my recaps. So obviously, a major theme that this show tackles is loneliness, which is especially relevant post-
Crap!
So you think this is funny?
According to British economist Noreen Hertz, loneliness can be viewed as a personal, societal, economic, and political problem, comprised not only of feeling bereft of love, company, or intimacy, but also feeling unsupported and uncared for by our fellow citizens, our employers, our community, and our government. And yes, I found this quote from that recent Wisecrack video, please don't sue me. From the cold open until Mooncake is introduced, Gary is on his own and has been for the better part of 5 years. I feel like that's why the show really leans into the loneliness as a prison metaphor. At the same time, the fact that Gary is doing manual labor for his prison sentence also brings up some social commentary. It's a nice dystopian twist that even in the far future, the criminal justice system still extracts labor from prisoners. This is the future that Jeff Bezos wants, but most people won't see that because they still think this is just a cartoony sci-fi. Another thing that I think adds to the theme of loneliness is the way that the sames are cold and robotic towards Gary. They don't even say a word to him, but later during the shootout, we see that the sames are capable of speech and even emotion to a point.
My arm, man!
So, the fact that they give Gary the cold shoulder, and have been for 5 years, must have felt very isolating to him. I guess you could think of the sames as the prison guards, while Hugh is more of the counselor or mediator. Hugh is just an AI that lays out the facts as is, while also being fair about it. However, he's not just your average Siri. Hugh has a little sass to him, and even some emotion.
Get off my cheeks, Hugh!
Get off my cheeks, Gary.
Though blunt enough not to indulge Gary in his delusions, Hugh Hugh still eventually listens to Gary's plan to shake the bounty hunters. I also like how Avocado is introduced in this episode.
Listen, buddy.
I especially like the joke that he seems to get disarmed by a simple question.
Do you play cards?
Though he doesn't get much screen time in this episode, Avocado's personality gets conveyed perfectly. Plus all the cat noises he makes are just...
Why should I believe you, Mr. Whiskers?
Call me that again, and I'll kill you.
Also, the fact that he's a different species shines a light on some glaring issues with Gary.
I'm not a cat. I'm a Ventrexian.
Got it. See, I'm a Presbyterian myself, but I love all people, just how I was raised.
By the way, while I'm not going to get into Kevin or Mooncake in this video, I do want to point out that Kevin is not only annoying, but actively malicious by pranking Gary in his sleep. Meanwhile, Mooncake is that feeling inside you that sparks joy and inspiration. They're kinda like two sides of the same coin. One thing that this show does well is how they balance the steepening stakes throughout the show. Whenever things get tense, the situation is always analyzed and made plain by Hugh. Everything is always right on the verge of impossible. From Quinn receiving Gary's message to whether Gary will make the maneuver, and it's done in a way that really pushes me to the edge of my seat. Okay, I gotta stop praising this show. I gotta be fair and balanced after all. Like I said earlier, that scene where Gary fails the maneuver because he was holding on to Mooncake, even though Mooncake can fly through space, is just a little bit maddening. Like, Mooncake could have been a little more proactive, especially since Gary's life was literally on the line. Plus, I really can't stress enough how the layout of the trajectory really got to me. Though, I do understand that when producing animation at this scale, there's going to be some things lost in translation between all the departments. And like I said before, this is Olin's first time producing something at this scale, so ultimately I can look past this mistake. There are also some points in this episode where it kind of feels like things were just added to pad the runtime in order to run on TBS. Like this part where Gary is running for his life to grab his helmet, he just comes back to dropkick Kevin? I just find it hard to believe that Gary could hate Kevin enough to risk his own life. It doesn't really add anything to the episode, so I had to call it out. There was also this scene where Gary tries to hide Mooncake. It's just not funny at all, and I definitely didn't use that as a sound for a TikTok. Now, let's move on to everybody's biggest criticism about the show, Gary. Yes, Gary is annoying. Like I said, he's a real dude bro that'd probably get wrapped up in the manosphere. He gives off some real golden retriever energy, but I think that's by design. You see, Gary really does grow throughout the series in a way where he has to be confronted with his aloof obliviousness. I mean, that whole sequence where he hits on Quinn is really disgusting. Also, the way he talks with Avocado just screams white-lived centrist.
See, I'm a Presbyterian myself, but I love all people.
Like, you're not supposed to like this character. So in that respect, this is really more of a positive than a negative for the show. The show subtly hints that something bigger has been going on just outside of Gary's cares. The way I see it, the biggest lesson that this show has to teach is to pay more attention to the world around you. Otherwise, it'll slip through your fingers before you know it. But I'm gonna leave it at that. I hope I got everything covered in this in-depth review. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and be sure to leave a like. I hear that helps me in the algorithm. Also, consider subscribing since you made it this far, and I'll see you next time. Bye!